At 14 years old, Emily Morgan couldn't read a single page without it twisting into chaos. Her billionaire father called her a disgrace, threatening to ship her away if she failed one more assignment. Tutor after tutor abandoned her, until Ruth, the new maid, quietly stepped forward. She recognized the look in Emily's eyes because she had once carried the same silent shame. Armed with the secret technique her mother died teaching her, Ruth began to unlock the gift buried beneath Emily's struggle. And when the results finally came back, the entire house froze in disbelief. Before we continue, if you're new to this channel, we'd love for you to subscribe. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring more stories that move, inspire, and stay with you. Stick with us to the very end. And if this story speaks to you, drop your thoughts below and share it with someone who might need it. Now, let's begin. Emily Morgan, daughter of billionaire Richard Morgan, had once again failed every piece of homework assigned to her. Her tutors whispered behind her back. Her teachers sent warnings. Her father's assistants wrote reports. And yet, she still couldn't read a single page without stumbling over the words as if they were foreign stones in her mouth. That morning, Richard finally snapped. He yelled, slammed the report onto the table, and told his daughter she had run out of chances. Then he made a decision no one expected. He fired the family's longtime maid on the spot, insisting her incompetence was holding Emily back. Emily didn't cry. She just stared down at her shoes, humiliated, swallowing the burning guilt she had carried for years. She whispered, "I'm sorry," but no one heard her. No one ever did. Richard hired a replacement almost immediately. Her name was Ruth. She was quiet, dark-skinned, and walked with a slow, thoughtful grace that unsettled the wealthy staff who were used to rushing and posturing. Ruth didn't react to the whispers that floated through the halls. She won't last. The Morgans are impossible. That girl can't be taught. Instead, on her first morning, she approached Emily with a soft smile and asked, "Can I sit with you?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't know how. She'd spent so long being scolded, corrected, and spoken over that silence had become her only safe place. Ruth lowered herself to Emily's level anyway, folding her hands neatly. "Your father says you struggle with homework," she said gently. Emily braced for judgment, but Ruth didn't offer any. She just waited, patient and calm, as if giving Emily room to breathe for the first time in years. When Emily finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I don't understand anything I read." Her voice cracked, small and trembling. Ruth's expression softened. Not pity, recognition. "Show me," she said. Emily hesitated, but something in Ruth's steady tone made her hand move. She opened her reading assignment, a simple paragraph meant for a child far younger than her. The words blurred again, like they always did. They scattered, swapped places, twisted shapes. Letters danced cruelly. Emily squeezed her eyes shut in embarrassment. In the past, this was the moment tutors snapped, sighed, or declared her lazy. But Ruth didn't correct her. She didn't rush her. She simply asked, "What do you see?" That question stunned Emily. No one had ever asked her that. Slowly, shakily, Emily explained how the letters jumped and flickered. Ruth listened carefully, nodding with an understanding Emily couldn't explain. When Emily finished, bracing for disappointment, Ruth only said, "All right, then we start from there." The lesson was nothing like the drills and punishments Emily had endured before. Ruth took the paper and turned it sideways, asking if the words behaved differently. Emily blinked. They did. Then Ruth covered most of the paragraph, revealing only a few words at a time. Suddenly, the dancing letters stood still, as if someone had calmed a storm. Emily gasped. Ruth smiled softly, not triumphant, just quietly proud. "You're not broken," she said. "Your mind just works differently." Emily felt something inside her crack open, a fragile, trembling hope she hadn't allowed herself in years. Ruth stayed with her through each flickering line, guiding her through the chaos with patience that felt almost unreal. And for the first time in her life, Emily read a full sentence without stumbling. The shock of it made her chest tighten. She looked up at Ruth with wide eyes. Ruth nodded gently, the corners of her eyes warming. See? You can learn. You just needed someone to see you. But outside the study room, danger brewed in hushed voices. Some staff resented Ruth already. The fired maid's friends, the jealous housekeepers, the snobbish assistants who hated anyone new. They whispered that Ruth was overstepping, that she acted too bold, that Richard would never accept a maid teaching his daughter. Emily sensed the tension long before she understood it. She noticed the glares, the forced smiles, the stiff shoulders whenever Ruth passed. A cold anxiety began to creep into her chest. She knew what happened when adults turned on someone, because she had lived in the crossfire her whole life. Still, Ruth kept showing up every morning with steady eyes and a calm voice, refusing to bend under the weight of the house's judgment. And as Emily slowly read her second sentence, shaky, imperfect, but real, she felt the smallest flicker of courage. Something was changing, something dangerous, something hopeful. And deep down, Emily knew one thing for certain. The world inside this mansion would never be the same again. The next morning rose with a strange, charged stillness, as if the house itself was waiting to see who would break first. Emily woke before sunrise, her mind replaying the sentence she had read the night before, the very first one that had ever stayed still long enough for her to understand. The moment glowed inside her like a fragile spark. She dressed quietly, afraid the spark would fade if she moved too quickly. Downstairs, the staff whispered in tight clusters, their words slithering through hallways like smoke. Emily recognized the tone. Everyone was angry, but no one dared to say it aloud. When she saw Ruth waiting by the study door with her calm, unfazed expression, Emily felt her heartbeat steady. For the first time in months, she wanted to learn. But when Ruth led her inside and laid out another reading sheet, the distant murmurs grew sharper, hungrier, and Emily sensed that their quiet little sanctuary was drawing unwanted eyes. Ruth began the lesson slowly, guiding Emily's gaze across the words as if leading her through a dark forest. "Breathe," she whispered. "Don't rush. Let the words settle." Emily did as she said. The letters flickered, trembled, then softened, as Ruth covered parts of the text and revealed only small fragments at a time. Emily read another sentence, then another. They were imperfect, stumbling, but they were hers. Ruth didn't clap or cheer. She smiled with a warmth so deep it felt like shelter. But before Emily could read her next line, the study door cracked open. Mrs. Turner, the head housekeeper, stood stiffly, her lips tightened in judgment. "Mr. Morgan wants an update," she said coldly. Ruth gently placed a hand on Emily's desk, grounding her. "Tell him she's learning," Ruth answered. The words were polite, but the undertone was bold, almost defiant. Mrs. Turner narrowed her eyes, as if committing that defiance to memory, then disappeared. Emily's hands trembled. Ruth leaned closer and whispered, "Focus on me, not them." And Emily tried. She truly did, even as the walls around them seemed to pulse with rising hostility. By midday, the quiet storm brewing inside the mansion finally broke. Richard called Ruth into his office. Emily, still in the study, listened from down the hall, her stomach twisting. Richard's voice rose sharply, echoing through the door. "You're a maid, not a tutor. Stay in your place." Emily's chest tightened painfully. She had heard him use that tone on assistants, drivers, even relatives, a tone meant to crush. But Ruth's voice did not crumble. "Your daughter is learning," she said steadily. "If you fire me now, she'll lose her first real chance." Silence followed, thick, stunned silence. Emily pressed her ear to the wall, breath held. Then Richard's voice lowered, dangerously controlled. "1 week. If I see no results, you're gone." Ruth did not thank him. She simply replied, "That's enough." When she returned to the study, her face was calm, but her eyes held a fire Emily hadn't seen before. Emily whispered, "Is he mad?" Ruth knelt beside her and said softly, "He's scared." People hide fear behind anger. Emily didn't fully understand, but Ruth's unwavering presence made her feel safe. For the first time in her life, she wanted to fight for something, or at least to not let someone fight alone. Lessons became more intense over the next few days. Not harsher, but deeper. Ruth used colored paper, tracing lines, rhythm patterns, word blocks, methods no tutor had ever tried. She made Emily tap her fingers to steady the words, hum softly to keep her focus, even walk around the room when her frustration peaked. Learning isn't supposed to feel like punishment, Ruth told her gently. It's supposed to feel like discovery. Emily found herself smiling during lessons, small, startled smiles, as if her face wasn't used to the feeling. She began reading short sentences out loud, her voice shaky but growing stronger. But outside the study door, resentment festered among the staff. Mrs. Turner whispered that Ruth was manipulating the child. One assistant suggested reporting her. Another insisted she was trying to replace real tutors. Emily overheard everything. The more she learned, the more the house seemed to turn against Ruth. And on the fifth day, the tension snapped. Emily and Ruth stepped out of the study to find several staff members gathered around Richard, speaking hurriedly, accusingly. When Richard's eyes locked on Emily, his jaw tightened. "Come here," he said. Emily stepped forward, terrified she had done something wrong. But Ruth touched her shoulder and whispered, "Stand tall." Emily did. Richard held out a small book. "Read," he ordered. Emily froze. Her throat tightened. The staff smirked, expecting failure. Her father's impatience radiated like heat. But Ruth stepped behind her, not touching her, just breathing with her, slow, steady, grounding. Emily opened the book. The words flickered, then settled. She read the first line, stumbled on the second, corrected herself, finished the third, and then the fourth. The room fell dead silent. The staff stared, speechless. Richard's eyes widened, a crack in the armor of the man who never showed surprise. Emily kept reading, her voice trembling but unbroken. When she finally lowered the book, she realized her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she had done something no one thought she could. Ruth's quiet voice broke the silence. "She is learning, and she will only grow." The room felt suddenly too small for the weight of those words. Richard didn't respond. He simply stared at his daughter, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. But Emily knew one thing with absolute certainty. The house had changed, and so had she. The mansion felt different the next morning, heavier and colder, as if every shadow clung tighter to the walls. Emily woke with the memory of yesterday burning in her chest, reading in front of her father, standing before the staff who doubted her, speaking words that once felt impossible. But victories in this house never came without consequences. She sensed it the moment she stepped onto the landing and heard the muted clatter of dishes, the clipped voices, the sealed-off tension that made her footsteps echo strangely. Ruth was waiting in the study, as calm as always, but there was something tight in her posture, something cautious. Emily rushed in and whispered, "They're mad at you." Ruth didn't deny it. "Some people don't like change," she said gently, "especially when it proves them wrong." Emily lowered her eyes. "I don't want them to hurt you." Ruth knelt, lifting Emily's chin with the softest touch. "You're not responsible for their hearts," she whispered. "Only your own." But even as she spoke, Emily could feel the mansion closing in around them, as if bracing for a storm no one knew how to stop. The storm arrived sooner than expected. That afternoon, Richard summoned both of them to his office. The staff lingered nearby, pretending to work but clearly waiting to witness the verdict. Richard sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, eyes unreadable. Emily's hands trembled at her sides, but Ruth stood still, composed. Richard cleared his throat. "I reviewed the footage." Emily's eyes shot up. "Cameras." There were cameras in the study. She had almost forgotten. He continued, "I saw the techniques you used, the methods, the unconventional approach." The room felt colder. Ruth didn't flinch. "And did you see your progress?" she asked. Richard paused. A long, brittle silence stretched across the space. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I did." Emily let out a shaky breath of relief, but Ruth didn't relax. She could feel something else coming. Richard leaned back, expression tightening. "However, this household has rules. Roles. Boundaries." His gaze sharpened. "And you crossed them." Emily's heart dropped. "No," she whispered. "She helped me. She's the only one who ever helped me. But Richard wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Ruth, measuring her, deciding her fate. Ruth did something then that Emily would never forget. She stepped forward, placed her hand gently over Emily's shoulder, and said, "If you want me to go, I will. But not because I failed her. Because you are afraid she might never need anyone's approval again." The room froze. Richard's jaw tightened. The staff gasped softly. Emily stared up at Ruth, stunned by her courage. Richard rose from his chair slowly, his expression conflicted, anger warring with something deeper, something almost vulnerable. "You overstep," he growled. "You don't know what I fear." Ruth met his gaze calmly. "I know the fear of losing control," she said. "I've seen it in rich homes, in poor homes, everywhere. But your daughter's mind is opening, and that is something no amount of control can stop." Emily felt her breath catch. She knew her father hated being challenged, but something in Ruth's words seemed to strike him like a quiet truth he couldn't shove aside. He looked at Emily, really looked, and for the first time his eyes softened with something like uncertainty. "Do you want her to stay?" he asked quietly. Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "I want her to stay." The silence that followed was long, trembling, and fragile. Richard exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering, his posture loosening as if he had been holding something too heavy for too long. "Then she stays," he said finally. The staff murmured in shock, some disappointed, others relieved, but Emily barely heard them. She threw her arms around Ruth, clinging to her with a fierce, grateful desperation. Ruth wrapped her arms around the girl gently, steady as always, whispering, "You did this, not me." Richard watched them, the tension in his face easing into something almost human. "Your lessons will continue," he said cautiously, "but I want updates. Weekly." Ruth nodded. Emily nodded too. And just like that, the air in the room shifted, not fully healed, but changed, like a window cracked open after years of suffocating air. The staff dispersed reluctantly. The house seemed confused by the shift in power, unsure how to handle a girl who finally had a voice. But Emily didn't care. For the first time, hope didn't feel like something she had to apologize for. That evening, Emily sat back in the study with Ruth beside her, the warm glow of a reading lamp casting soft shadows around them. The words on the page no longer swirled violently. They trembled, but they stayed still long enough for Emily to gather them, hold them, understand them. She read slowly, deeply, intentionally. Ruth listened, patient and proud. Every sentence Emily spoke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, a piece she hadn't even known she was missing. When she finished the chapter of her book, she looked up with wide, shining eyes. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. Ruth smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That fear was never yours," she said. "It was given to you, and now you're giving it back." Outside, the mansion lights dimmed. The halls quieted. The storm had passed, not because it disappeared, but because Emily had learned to stand inside it without breaking. She closed her book with trembling pride. Ruth placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. And in that soft, quiet moment, Emily understood she was no longer the girl who failed every homework. She was becoming someone stronger, sharper, and braver than anyone expected. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more.